General Motors is connecting 7 more deaths to a faulty ignition switch on many of its cars. The automaker is now doubling the size of a recall, and as Jeff Bloor reports, the company admits it made mistakes.
1.6 million vehicles now, and the nation's largest automaker has issued a public apology. Why? The problem was first discovered in 2004. The recalls came in 2014. 13 deaths and 31 crashes have been linked now to this ignition issue.
In the annals of automotive history, there are failures of engineering and there are profound failures of corporate morality. This is the story of the latter, a tragedy that begins not with a dramatic explosion, but with a fatal silent anomaly. A car crashes, the airbags don't deploy.
GM says that a heavy keyring or sudden jarring can switch some cars off. That means no engine power, no power steering or brakes, and the airbags don't work.
And when investigators inspect the wreckage, the engine is found to be, not stalled because the mechanics failed, not seized from an oil leak, but actively and intentionally off, as if the driver simply turned the key to the accessory position just before impact. It was a small, bizarre, and often overlooked detail in dozens of devastating accidents involving popular GM compacts like the Chevrolet Cobalt, the Saturn Ion, and the Pontiac G5. The crashes were horrific, the injuries severe, and the deaths inexplicable, given the supposed protection of modern passive safety systems. From 2004 onward, this baffling pattern repeated across thousands of cars. The common denominator was identified not as a complex computer chip or a stressed mechanical rod, but a single tiny component inside the steering column, a small spring and a metal pin. It was a failure of the most basic physics and cost-cutting culture, leading to a tragedy rooted in a fix that was estimated to cost less than 10 cents. To grasp the sheer scale of the negligence, we must first understand the fundamental job of the ignition switch. It is the absolute master control of the vehicle. It does much more than just start the car. When you turn the key to the run position, it locks into place, supplying continuous electrical power to the engine, the fuel pump, the power steering, the power brakes, and critically, the entire vehicle's supplemental restraint system, including the airbags. When an ignition switch is correctly designed, the key is supposed to be held firmly in the run position by a mechanism. This involves a detent, a small spring-loaded metal pin or roller that physically locks into a corresponding notch on the switch cylinder. To turn the car off, the driver has to apply a deliberate, distinct amount of rotational force or torque to overcome the tension of that spring and push the pin out of the notch. This torque specification is a non-negotiable safety feature designed explicitly to prevent the car from accidentally shutting down while moving. The initial GM design for this crucial mechanism was fatally flawed. The internal spring used to hold the key was weak, and the metal detent notch was shallow. As a result, the required torque needed to move the switch out of run was dangerously low, significantly lower than the safety standards used by most competitors. This meant that the delicate balance of the switch could be upset by forces that should never have caused a failure. It allowed for what is known as an inadvertent shutoff, a fancy engineering term for the most mundane things. The simple swinging weight of a heavy keychain, the sudden jolt from hitting a sharp pothole, or even the torque generated by a slight steering correction could generate enough force to cause the key to silently slip from the run position to the accessory position. The consequences of this small, almost imperceptible slip were immediately catastrophic. When the switch moves to accessory, it instantly cuts power to the engine, which leads to a loss of propulsion. But it also immediately cuts power to the highly sensitive electrical systems that control the power steering and power brakes. The driver is instantly deprived of the basic hydraulic and electrical assist they rely on, making the car incredibly difficult to steer or slow down. But the true horrifying tragedy, the reason dozens of people lost their lives, is that the accessory position also cuts power to the airbag module. In a crash, the driver and passengers are left with a stalled, almost uncontrollable car, no braking assist, no steering assist, and the entire supplemental restraint system, which was supposed to be their last line of defense, is silently and completely disabled. Engineers at GM's sprawling corporate and technical centers knew about this fundamental flaw almost from the moment the cars rolled off the line. Internal GM documents from as early as 2004 described stalling problems and clearly noted that the key could be bumped out of run and into accessory. The original supplier of the ignition switch, Delphi, was approached by GM engineers asking for a solution to the low torque problem. The fix was almost embarrassingly simple. Replace the weak spring with a stronger one and mill the detent notch a little deeper. The engineers estimated the cost for this upgraded, safer part approximately 10 cents per unit. This right here is the precise moment the problem transcended engineering and became a profound moral disaster. GM's cost-cutting culture, the one that had defined the company for generations, rejected the 10-cent fix. The expense of retooling the assembly lines for the new switch, plus the added 10 cents per car across the millions of vehicles they planned to build, was deemed by management to be an unjustified cost. The decision was a cold calculation. They decided it was cheaper to tolerate a few complaints about vehicles stalling than to spend a mere dime per car to ensure the safety of millions of drivers. This cold corporate triage, done in a sterile meeting room, effectively signed the death warrants for more than 100 people. What followed was not an accident. It was a slow, deliberate corporate cover-up that lasted nearly a decade. The complaints about stalling and non-deploying airbags continued to pour in. Facing rising pressure and mounting liability, GM eventually authorized a fix, but they did it in a deeply dishonest manner. In 2006, an engineer, likely acting to solve a problem he knew was deadly, quietly authorized a significant design change to the switch. The new switch used the stronger spring and deeper detent, finally meeting the necessary safety torque specification. Crucially and scandalously, the part number was not changed. This was a deliberate move designed to avoid creating a paper trail. Had the part number changed, it would have immediately signaled a formal engineering change, triggering mandatory reporting to the NHTSA and requiring a massive public safety recall. By keeping the same part number, GM was able to introduce the new, safer switch into production while maintaining the fiction that the old deadly switch was functionally identical. This kept the fix secret, preventing a paper trail that would link the new, safer design to the hundreds of accidents caused by the old, faulty one. It was a silent, cynical admission of guilt buried deep in the archives of their parts department. For years, consumers and investigators fought GM in court. Families who lost loved ones were consistently stonewalled by company representatives who relied on the convenient yet false explanation that the driver must have turned the key. It wasn't until a persistent lawyer working a wrongful death case discovered the physical discrepancy between the switch in the wrecked car and the switch in a newer car, a part that, according to GM's own internal records, was the exact same part number, that the entire decade-long cover-up finally broke wide open. The floodgates opened. The official tally of the tragedy would eventually confirm over 124 deaths and 275 serious injuries directly linked to the faulty switch. GM was forced to recall over 2.6 million vehicles across numerous model lines and paid a staggering $900 million criminal fine to the Department of Justice for concealing the defect from regulators and the public. They also established a compensation fund that paid out over $500 million to victims and their families. The GM ignition switch scandal is more than just a recall. It is a masterclass in corporate negligence and a permanent, painful stain on the history of General Motors. It was a colossal failure that wasn't caused by a lack of engineering talent. It was caused by a devastating lack of moral will. The question posed in the corporate meeting room was not, can we fix this problem and save lives? The question was simply, how much will this fix cost? And for the price of a single dime, General Motors allowed a preventable, fatal flaw to exist for nearly a decade, creating a tragedy that continues to haunt the industry today. The ignition switch, the smallest component in the vehicle, remains the industry's permanent, painful reminder that in the automotive world, prioritizing profit over basic safety, even by 10 cents, can lead to the largest moral failure.